But of course, this weekend, we are commemorating the first battle, the Battle of Freeman's Farm. Now, I mentioned, as you know, it's the 20th of September today. If we were to transport ourselves back in time to the 20th of September in 1777, you would see that we would be surrounded by very, very tall canopy trees. So imagine the trees being closer to us and much taller because these trees had never been cut down before. What you see, these trees, these are all trees that started up in the 1930s, 1940s. So this is very much second growth. So imagine trees much taller. You would have seen a lot of red coats. We got a couple of them today. Watch out. They don't bite, but still, they might try to recruit you. But worst of all, you would have seen a lot of dead bodies. The remains of those who were dead, and many of them who were just wounded and scraping along the ground, trying to get help. On the field right now, 248 years ago. About 100 Americans and hundreds of British soldiers killed or mortally wounded here on this very ground. And so many other hundreds wounded that had been removed from the field, and they're now being cared for, hopefully anyway, in hospitals nearby. So we can imagine that this place is indeed a cemetery, because those who died here are buried near where they fell. There is no big cart coming around, taking the bodies a mile away and burying them in nicely arranged graves. It wasn't like that. I'll talk more about this later on in the tour, but they were buried pretty much in situ, pretty much right where they fell. So even though there are no headstones out there, there are no footstones out there, there are no crosses or markers denoting a specific burial, there are hundreds of bodies buried out there to this day. And for those Americans who died, they were fighting for the United States of America. Remember, we declared our independence, the United States, in July of 1776. We said that we were no longer colonists. We're no longer colonies of the British imperial fold. We are now our own nation, the United States of America. So these soldiers who fought and died here were very much fighting for the United States. They are United States veterans. So, if I may, I like people to think about, you go to a national cemetery like the Saratoga National Cemetery. It's a beautiful place with all of the, everybody buried in the ground, veterans of war. And here we come here, there are no external visual cues for burials, but they are buried here too. I'll talk more about that, about some specific individuals who died here right on this very field as we get to the end of the battle, the end game of the battle, if you will. But first, we gotta start the battle. So transport yourself back in time to Friday, the 19th of September, 1777. Please note that the day of the week aligns with this day. The battle was historically fought on Friday, the 19th of September, and the aftermath was the 20th, which was a Saturday, just like today. So the 19th of September, Friday, 1777. This place was, let's say, early in the morning, completely abandoned. There was nobody here. The Northern Army, the American Army, was located at stops number 2 and 3 on our tour road. I think you probably drove by those stops. Maybe you saw some of those Continental soldiers up there at stop 2. Well, the Northern Army, the American Army, was entrenching, and they were fully aware that the British Army was just a few miles to the north, and that they would inevitably advance. And so a battle would happen someplace. So you can imagine that morning, the morning of the 19th of September, the Americans at what is now stops 2 and 3, they had, excitement, they had trepidation, they had fear, but they certainly had a stalwart, feeling about the need to stop this invasion, this British invasion from Canada. Now, as for the British, they were encamped at about where the National Cemetery is today. So if you know where the Saratoga National Cemetery is today, a couple miles north of us, about 2 miles north of us or so, that's where the British Army was camped. They had been there for a couple days. And the British, on the morning of the 19th of September, decided that that was the day to advance. And their goal was to advance south, find the American lines of defense, if they could get that far, and blast through them with artillery and infantry. hopefully rout the Americans, and then march on their way to Albany. That was the British destination. They had come all the way from Canada. They were trying to get to Albany. That was where they were trying to go, and they knew full well that the American army was in the way at, again, stops 2 and 3 on our tour road. So that morning, the British Army, commanded by Lieutenant General John Burgoyne, packed up their camp. So if you went to stop 2, I think you all did, right? You can imagine all those tents, those wedge tents you see. All those tents, they had to be taken down. The wooden poles and the linen canvas, that was all rolled up and plopped on baggage carts and wagons. The hospital, they had to pack up everything from the hospital, put the hospital supplies in boats on the river, any kind of provisions, food that they may have brought off the river for the troops. Anything left, they have to put that back on boats in the river. And the soldiers have to put on their knapsacks, their blankets, and of course their muskets, and they are ready to march. General Burgoyne's army splits itself up into 3 separate columns. He's got about 8,400 troops in his army. So that's the number, all told, that you're looking at, 8,400 troops. They break up into 3 separate columns. And in the early morning hours, they begin their advance in these 3 columns. Let's go a little bit over here. We'll talk more about that. No, not in the rest. So as I said, on the morning of the 19th of September, the British Army packed up all of its baggage, and in 3 separate columns, the British Army begins its advance. Now, they kind of know where to go. Although, you know, they didn't have, like, any British soldiers who lived here. They're from Great Britain or Ireland, right? And they had, you know, German soldiers. They didn't know this place from anywhere else. Guess who they did have? They had local Royalist Americans, because not every American liked the idea of independence. And one of the families that happened to not like the idea of independence was the John and Ethelana Freeman family. So this is called Freeman's Farm. That's because John and Ethelana Freeman and their 8 or so children, the numbers vary, so we're not sure how many kids they had, but their 8 or so children lived on this property. They farmed and cultivated these fields since the 1760s. They had come up from Connecticut after the French and Indian War was finished, after it was safe to move to upstate New York, so that there was no more threat of French attacks from Canada after the French and Indian War. So they moved up here. They leased a bunch of land from Philip Schuyler. You know that name probably. He was a general in the Revolutionary War, and in the 1760s, he had leased land to the Freemans. So the Freemans were here. They had a log cabin somewhere about where you see that large tree right there, and they had a couple of barns. They had most of their cultivated fields down there, and they're growing things like barley and flax and maize, etc., etc. So that's where most of the cultivation is done. On the south side of the field, they had set up a lot of fencing for their sheep and cows. So it's a nice little farm, an up-and-coming farm for this family. Well, the war begins. They don't like the idea of the revolution. They want a restoration of what they call legitimate government. They don't like the idea of rebellion. United States, no way. We have to maintain our ties with Great Britain. So in 1777, as they hear that the British Army's coming out of Canada, they're thinking to themselves, we would love to join the British Army because we know with them we'll be safe. If we stay here for much longer, our neighbors, almost all of whom are radical, revolutionary United States people, you know, they're going to arrest us, etc., through their committees of safety and protection. So we want out of here. We want to be with the British. But they can't get through the American lines, right? They can't just go north, and the Americans aren't going to let them go, sure, go and join the British. No, 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 that's not going to be allowed. However, in August of 1777, you know, a good month plus before the battles of Saratoga, as the American army is retreating from the north with the loss of Fort Ticonderoga, the Battle of Hubbardton, the Battle of Fort Anne, and all that, the Freemans had their chance. So they skedaddled, they left, they abandoned their farm, and they joined Burgoyne's army at Fort Edward in August of 1777. But now, by the time of the battles of Saratoga, they're here. They're back to their farm, almost at least, because it's the morning of the 19th, and that British army is still advancing in 3 columns. But Burgoyne has with him John Freeman and the Freemans. They know where the roads are, they know where the lanes are, they know how to navigate. So it's not like the British are advancing blindly so much, because they have an idea as to where the layouts of the roads are. And so the 3 separate columns go something like this. Alongside the river is the largest of the 3 columns. It has most of the German soldiers with it. You may have heard of Hessians before, Hessians. You know, most of them aren't Hessian technically, but there are Hessians down there too. And these soldiers were hired by the Kingdom of Great Britain to augment the British war effort in this war against the United States. So you had thousands of Germans down by the river with some redcoats too. And that's also where they had all of the wagons, the carts, all the boats transporting all of those supplies. Those are in the river. So it's like a guard for all of those precious supplies down along in the valley. But the 2 combat columns, they were the other 2 columns. One was the center column, which would come up right through here on the 19th of September. That consisted of 4 British infantry regiments, redcoats, just like you see here, 4 different regiments. A regiment had, on average, the numbers varied widely depending on the regiment and the context, but a good average is 400 officers and men. So when I say regiment, it's good to typically think 400. Sometimes the regiment would be more, sometimes less, but a good average is 400. So 4 British regiments, plus they got 4 of those. You see that cannon right there, that one? That is a light 6-pounder. We have an original in our visitor center. So if you went into the visitor center and you see the big carriage with the big wheels, and then there's a piece of artillery mounted on it, that artillery barrel is actually from Burgoyne's army in the battles of Saratoga. Very likely one of the 4 that was here at Freeman's farm on the 19th of September, in fact. So they had 4 of those, and that's going to be the center column. Then the westernmost column, commanded by General Fraser, Simon Fraser, General Burgoyne's best British general, they're going to be marching to the west of us at the base of what is now the hill that the visitor center is upon. So the hill over there, they're marching south, just kind of along the base of the hill. And with Fraser, he's got all of Burgoyne's elite troops, the grenadiers, the light infantry. You see some light infantrymen like with those fun little hats with the feathers. These guys here, they're light infantry. They got powder horns. They're some of the most elite soldiers, British soldiers of Burgoyne's army. He also has the 24th Regiment of Foot, which are most of the British redcoats we have today. They've got the green horsehair in their caps. They're also better trained than the average British soldier. So all of the elite soldiers of Burgoyne's army are over there, not here at Freeman's farm, or at least, edging to Freeman's farm. They haven't gotten here yet. Now, from the American side of things, our forces know where the British are. We have been informed through scouts that the British are packing up and they're going to make their march. And so word comes into the American camp. The commanding general of the Northern Army, Horatio Gates, he meets with his de facto second in command, Benedict Arnold, and they talk about strategy. What do we do? Now that we know that the British are moving this morning, what do we do? Well, Benedict Arnold, does anybody have an idea what Benedict Arnold wanted to do? Anybody? What's that? Yes, attack, advance, exactly right. That's Benedict Arnold's MO, right? That's what he does. He wants to go out there and attack immediately. He wants to advance with the troops. And Horatio Gates, not so much. No. Horatio Gates is thinking very conservatively. This is the first time Horatio Gates has ever commanded an army before on what will be a battle event. He's never commanded an army before in the field. This is his first time. So given it's his first time, he doesn't want to just rush out there. Benedict Arnold had all this experience under his belt, but not Horatio Gates insofar as commanding a large military force in a battle. He had never done it. So Horatio Gates is like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Now Horatio Gates is thinking, why don't we just allow the British to advance and let them attack us? Our defenses are so strong, and by all accounts, our numbers are about the same as the enemy, about 8,200 to their 8,400. So we have most advantages here. I don't see why we should lose American lives by going out there and attacking for no reason. That's what Gates is thinking of. They compromise. What is decided upon is that Benedict Arnold will be allowed to send out Daniel Morgan's Corps of Riflemen, as well as Henry Dearborn's Corps of Light Infantry, about 750 officers and men all told. And they are to reconnoiter the enemy, quote unquote, reconnoiter. That means go out there, check them out, follow their progress, and indeed they were authorized to shoot from a distance as long as they can do it safely as they're doing this reconnoitering. In the meantime, Horatio Gates would prepare the defenses back at Bemis Heights so that when the British arrive, they will have been spent from engaging with the riflemen and the light infantry, and of course our defenses will be even more ready to go than otherwise. So that was the permission Arnold received. He was also told by Gates that if something bad happens to these guys, because they're the best troops we've got, quote, you may support them if necessary. Arnold said, all right. So there goes Daniel Morgan and his Corps of Riflemen, 400 riflemen from Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, picked men out of the ranks of the Continental Army from George Washington's main army because of their rifle prowess. That means that they weren't just handed a rifle that day and said, here, best of luck to you. No. These guys knew what they were doing. They were expert marksmen. One of these riflemen would be able to, shoot the nut out of a squirrel's mouth at 200 yards. They were that good. They were excellent sharp shooters. There were only 400 of them, but still, that's 350 more riflemen than the British forces had. They only had 50. We had 400. And with them was the Corps of New England Light Infantry, commanded by Henry Dearborn. Now, these guys were kind of new. They had never been light infantry before. They never received specialized training, so they're kind of new at it. But they were, on average, the younger. They can run fast. They're kind of slim, unlike me. They could, bolt around the fields fast. That's the whole idea of light infantry, quick maneuvers, right? So they were ready to go, although they were not experienced nor trained yet. But the riflemen were. So here they come. It's late morning on the 19th of September. The riflemen are way ahead of the light infantry. The rifleman column has extended itself. They were way in advance of the light infantry, and they start to spill out on the southern side of Freeman's farm, and they start to deploy in various little pockets around the field, including one of the Pennsylvania companies commanded by Captain Swearingen. They come over here, and they start to go into, the house, the cabin that was right there. They go into the barn. They hide behind trees. And it didn't take long for them to see the first glimpses of red coming out of that tree line right there. We even have a pathway that goes down into it. That is the trail that you could imagine the British would have been coming up on. Now the British, there were about 100 of them. They formed a screening line, and so they came out of the woods, not in a column, but rather as an extended order screening line. They come out of the woods because they're looking to make sure that Freeman's farm is clear. They're the advance guard for the center column. You don't want the center column with all its troops just bumbling on the field and then get a surprise attack. The idea is that to make sure that the coast is clear, hence you have this screening force. And they come up that slight rise. Well, guess what happens to them? the riflemen shoot them down. Most of them are killed or wounded. These guys are thrashed so badly that they just turn tail and run back to the tree line. They run. Now, Swearengen's guys, unfortunately, the riflemen, right? They got a little excited about seeing the redcoats run, and so a lot of them started to chase after the British soldiers, to chase them. This was a mistake, unfortunately, because Simon Fraser, who had deployed various elements of his advanced corps throughout the field over there, and there would have been a tree line like in the way, so you would not have been having a cleared line of sight like you do today. A lot of what we have here represents a lot of the trees that were cut down after the First Battle of Saratoga, before the Second Battle. So the field force configuration isn't quite right for the First Battle. But imagine you could not see that field over there. So Fraser had deployed his guys, most of them from the 24th Regiment, like our friendly drummer over there, as well as some light infantry, like these guys over here. And they heard the firing, the cracks from the riflemen, and they heard the yelling and the screaming, and Fraser's thinking, oh, something bad's going on there. I'm going to send in troops to try to figure it out. So he sends some light infantry, 24th Regiment soldiers, and 2 grasshopper cannons. You see that little cannon right there? That's called a grasshopper. It's a light 3-pounder. And so they sent 2 of those over with the infantry, and they come upon Swearengen's guys on the flank. They hit them on the flank, on their left flank. The riflemen are not prepared for this. The riflemen are, of course, shocked by being attacked by guys that they didn't even know were approaching them. They made a fast attack, the British did. And so the riflemen started to panic and run out. This caused a panicked chain reaction amongst all of Daniel Morgan's riflemen. Daniel Morgan's riflemen just completely scattered to the 4 winds. A majority of them rushed to the south side of the farm. The light infantry still hadn't arrived to help them out. Unfortunately, the 350 light infantry were still far behind. Morgan and his 2 field officers are completely befuddled about this surprise attack and the scattering of the riflemen. They try to get their men in order, but it takes time. According to one guy who wrote about it on that day in a letter, he said that the riflemen had retreated a full half-mile south of the southern tree line on Freeman's farm. So that goes to show you how terrified the riflemen were, of this unexpected British flanking attack. So, the riflemen are scattered. Now, finally, the Corps of Light Infantry arrives, and too late to help them out. But what they're going to do, the light infantry, the American light infantry, that is, it's kind of hard to see, but there is we'll see it later better. There's like a hill over there beyond these 2 big trees. There's a hill over there. It was wooded at the time, and we know that that's where Henry Dearborn posted his light infantrymen, basically as a watch over Freeman's farm. They were not looking to go into battle. They were a watch force to see what developed further from there. So, casualties occurred. Both sides kind of backed off at Freeman's farm early that afternoon on the 19th of September. Then, not long after that, the British center column comes out of the wood line. All 4 regiments, again, about 400 officers and men per regiment, plus their 4 light 6-pounders broken up into 2 pair. They're going to come out of the out of the forest, and they're going to deploy in a linear formation. Regiment number 9, Regiment number 21, Regiment number 62, and Regiment number 20 covering that flank way down on the cultivated field. The 9th Regiment was quickly sent back as a reserve, so they actually didn't participate in the forthcoming battle, but these 3 regiments were going to pay a very severe price in officers and soldiers killed, wounded, and captured in the forthcoming battle. But the Royal Artillery, the soldiers, they're ready to go. They kind of get a glimpse of the Americans over there on that hilltop, Dearborn's guys. And General Burgoyne, who is present here at Freeman's farm, he's actually here, on horseback, of course. The order is given to have the British soldiers divest themselves of all of their camp equipage. So you can imagine, and some of these redcoats have them, they're not wearing them right now, but you can imagine all of these redcoats, they had knapsacks, they had blankets, some of them are carrying like tin buckets for cooking and stuff like that. Well, they're ordered to take all of these things off, get rid of them, pile them up behind the lines so that when they have to fight in the forthcoming battle, they'll be ready to go very efficiently without being bogged down with a lot of equipment. If you've heard the stereotype of the stupid British soldier with, heavy weights on their backs and stuff like that, I'm not saying it never happened, but that definitely did not happen here, certainly. Nor did it happen for most of the war. So these redcoats are ready to go. They would like nothing more than the Americans to attack them across this open field. Guess what the Americans were not going to do? Attack them across this open field. And so you kind of had to stare down for a little bit. We're not sure of the details or how long it lasted. But finally, somewhere around 2:30-ish, somewhere in there, one of the regiments advances. The center regiment, not the flanking regiments. You want to keep them back just in case they need to react to something. But the center regiment, the 62nd Regiment of Foot, the junior regiment of Burgoyne's army, they are going to advance south, going for those light infantrymen. 400 guys, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Anstruther of Scotland. He's leading his mostly Irish regiment south toward the Americans, which we're going to do now. So follow me, we'll head on down. It's basically just a smooth, piece of metal. However, with the rifle had a spiral groove, or multiple spiral grooves, bless you, within its barrel. Not spiraled like a corkscrew, not like that. That would blow up the rifle. But the spiral groove was very slight, and they paralleled each other within the barrel of the rifle. And so when you shoot the ball out of the rifle, what happens is a spin is put on that ball because of those rifling grooves, which then propelled the ball faster and made it shoot more accurately than it did with this. A good comparison, I think, is in football. If you take a football, you put a spin on that football to throw it further and more accurately. That's what the rifle does to a ball. That's how the riflemen are able to shoot at an individual, let's say, 250, 300 yards away and hit them, if they knew how to be a well-trained marksman, if they had that that talent and that training. Whereas just a common soldier of any army using a smoothbore musket like you saw at Stop 2 with the Continentals, or like here with the Redcoats, you just load the thing, shoot it rather blindly. If you're picking a target, you could hit a man-sized target if you were a good marksman at 80 yards away. But past then, the ball's hitting the ground at 150 yards, whereas this thing, you can still, hit a man-sized target 300 yards away and hit him, like I said. So this kind of gives you a visual representation of what these two things look like, the differences. So we have it, remember, the 62nd Regiment of Foot, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Anstruther. They're marching south in the direction of Dearborn's Corps of Light Infantry. That's the hill I was talking about. You can see it now. It's totally kind of mowed over, right over there. It was wooded at the time, and so the 62nd Regiment was kind of gunning for them, but they were distracted because out of this wood line crashes the 1st New Hampshire Regiment, commanded by Colonel Joseph Silly. The 1st New Hampshire Regiment was a Continental regiment that Benedict Arnold had sent to the battlefront. Please remember that Benedict Arnold was authorized by Horatio Gates to support the elite troops if necessary, if they had been scattered or encircled or something like that. Support them if necessary. Arnold felt that they needed support. The riflemen had just been scattered, so word came back to camp, and now Silly's regiment was deployed under Arnold's direction. So Silly comes out with his about 400 officers and men, and they come out of this wood line and they array themselves in line of battle. The 62nd Regiment thought it best then to swerve over and strike at these guys. As for Dearborn, he was now going to be entangled with the 21st Regiment of Foot, which was brought up to battle them. But here we had the first massive firefight of the Battle of Freeman's Farm. It happened somewhere around 3 o'clock on the afternoon of the 19th of September, 1777. So you had about 400 guys versus 400 guys. The British had 2 of those light 6-pounders with them. Guess who won? about 20 minutes, Silly's men had to retreat. One of their officers wrote in his journal that day that they didn't last but 20 minutes, and then they had to retreat because of their high number of casualties. And come to find out, if you look at the American unit casualties in the battle, the 1st New Hampshire Regiment suffered the most of any American unit, in great part because of this very brave but unfortunately futile action. And here they come right now. Yeah, good timing. So we are where the British were, they are where the Silly's regiment was, and like I said, Silly's regiment retreated. As they're retreating, Colonel Silly encounters Colonel Alexander Scammell, commander of the 3rd New Hampshire Regiment. Scammell says, hey, I was just sent by Arnold to come out here and support you, but I see you're retreating. Why don't you turn around and come with me, and then together we'll go and fight the British here at this farm, on the farm to the north, Freeman's farm. And so he says, okay, let's do that. Scammell says, and don't you worry, more are on the way. Yes, Connecticut militia are behind me, commanded by Colonel Thaddeus Cook. They're coming too, so they're going to bolster our line even more. So now you have these 2 New Hampshire regiments come out onto the field. Now they're double strength. The 62nd Regiment with their cannons, they have a certain advantage, at least with firepower, but not with numbers. I mean, when it comes to actual muskets, they're outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. And so you can imagine kind of a back and forth, but those cannons are incredibly, obviously dangerous. That goes without saying, but can you imagine, I can't believe it, but it's true, they could load and fire those things with either a solid iron ball, which is not necessarily what you want to use in this context. It's better if you want to kill people to use what's called case shot. Case shot. Imagine a tin can full of large iron balls. Large iron balls, about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. And there's 36 of them per shot. So when you shoot that can effectively, they called it tinned case shot, because it was housed in what looks like a tin can. That tin, of course, just was evaporated, and the iron balls are going to shoot out like a big shotgun. And those balls are going to maybe go for, not quite 100 yards, but if you're that close to the enemy, that's what you want to use. It'll hit a lot more people, obviously. And so the New Hampshiremen were being raked over by these case shot explosions, and the Royal Artillery that were loading and firing these cannons could load and set one off a dozen times a minute.
Oh my God! Wow.
I know. It's insane. I know. Wow. Sadly, we can't do it. I would love to see it done, because you could train up somebody to do it, but like in the National Park Service, because we have so many serious restrictions about safety, that was not a safe way to do it, but needs must, right? So they were trained to do it a dozen times a minute. It's incredible, because you have multiple people manning a cannon like that. I mean, you have a dozen people manning a cannon like that, and each one has their own part to play, and they do it because they've had the training drilled into them. They know what they have to do exactly when, and so they can keep this thing going like clockwork. Unlike an individual soldier who has to load and fire his musket himself, which means he has to go through every single stage of the loading process as an individual, whereas that thing is loaded and fired by multiple people that are doing the process. So it happens a lot faster than a musket. And if you're wondering, a soldier with a musket, if they're shooting for speed, a smoothbore musket, not a rifle, could do it 4 to 5 times a minute. 4 to 5 times a minute,
wow,
which is
pretty fast.
Pretty good. Yeah, right.
So on a rifle, the spiraling is slower putting it in?
That's exactly right, because the ball and the patch are made so that they hug the interior of the barrel to get that spiraling effect, which means that you can load and fire a rifle about once every minute and a half.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. These are kind of the costs and benefits of the rifle versus the musket. And there were others too, but that's a principal one. You're right. Yes, exactly right. So you can imagine the kind of firepower advantage that the British had here because of their light 6-pounders. And so the American forces are going to have to withdraw. But what do? They don't retreat. They go into the wood line. They're not going to be out in the field anymore. They go into the wood line. And now please remember that unlike the second growth forest we have today, remember we have canopy trees with much thicker trunks, bigger trunks. That's what you've got. And so the Continentals, they'll go with the New Hampshire Continentals, they'll go right behind the wood line, post themselves behind these large trees. And what do? They use the trees for cover because the artillery, they got to get out of the way of that stuff. So they'll pop around the tree, shoot, reload behind the tree, etc. Now the British, they'd seen this tactic before. They're not idiots. They've experienced this before, and they were ready for it. They have been trained to combat this very tactic. So what do? Lieutenant Colonel Anstruther gives the order to tree. That's what he says, to tree. And so the British know to rush forward with fixed bayonets. The Americans have bayonets too, most of them anyway. But rush forward with fixed bayonets with your firing partner. In other words, a pair of soldiers. You're going to rush into the woods and you're going to get the nearest tree you can so that you can use that same tactic against the Americans. And that's the order that they developed, the British Army, to tree, for that very tactic. And so the Americans, they hadn't really seen this before, right? So they kind of fall back a little bit. They're not running away back to camp. No, they're just going to fall back deeper into the woods. Now the British have an edge into the woods. The artillery, which had fired in advance of the British rush, was firing, of course, to scare off the Americans to make it safer for the British bayonet attack. But according to one American officer, he said that the fire from the British artillery that did, quote, little more than to take the limbs from the trees. So you can see what protection these trees afforded our soldiers behind those lines, behind the line of trees, I should say. And so the British go into the woods. They now have a foothold into the woods, and they're going to advance from tree to tree in the woods, and we are going to fall back. But this isn't so bad, right? We're falling back, but they're getting sucked into the woods deeper and deeper and deeper. Now the Connecticut militia arrives. Now we outnumber the British infantry in the woods about 3-1. And the British realize, we've gone too far. Now we're overwhelmed. And so the British are the ones now falling back because we're turning the tide of battle against them. And so we're going at them, and the British are going to fall back. And according to one British officer who later wrote about it, he said that in one of these actions, because this actually happened a few times during the course of that afternoon, he said that those who were the forwardmost soldiers rushing at the enemy were the first to fall during the retreat. No surprise, right? Because they were the most advanced soldiers closest to the enemy. And so when the counterattack came about, well, they're going to be the ones captured or wounded or killed. And so the British forces are flushed out of the woods. They reform their ranks. They got their cannons shooting, keeping the Americans from coming out into the open field. But you know what? That's okay. We'll just stay within that tree line, shooting back at the British. The British are like, oh my gosh, we got to do that again. So they go back into the woods. And according to one officer, this was done 6 different times during the course of the day between this one regiment and the New Hampshire and Connecticut troops in the woods. Back and forth, sometimes deep into the woods, sometimes over in that direction, sometimes shallowly into the woods, but either way, 6 different times. I don't want to imagine what that was like, and you can imagine how many people on this very ground that we're standing on lost their lives doing this kind of either standing out here in the open or rushing into the woods. And as the battle wore on and the British, this particular regiment is getting so worn down, their troops are falling back, and at one point they can't stand, because the American attack out of the woods then is so overwhelming that they retreat. They try to carry off their light 6-pounders, but they can't. And so we capture those cannons. We get those cannons. We try to carry them off the field to get them out of the way so the British can't use them again. But no time for that, because the British counterattack with reinforcements, and so the British get their cannons back. And so even the cannons are going to be fought over in this Battle of Freeman's Farm. As for the light infantry, Dearborn's Corps of Light Infantry, the 21st Regiment of Foot, they were going at it as well in similar kind of combat, but the 21st Regiment was directed more to assist the 62nd Regiment as the battle wore on. And Dearborn's guys, they're actually going to go to the west and fight against Fraser's advanced corps on the fields and in the woods to the west of us, which isn't really part of our tour stops, but it is within our park. So you can imagine while this battle is raging here, there is another almost separate battle happening to the west of us in the woods and in the fields. Still within our park boundaries, but just not part of our tour stop. You know, there's no stop for that particular combat. But imagine like if you're at stop number 1 and you're looking down on the field below you and the woods to the south side, that's where a lot of that fighting occurred.
Were there any cannons in that fight over there?
There were, yeah. Simon Fraser had 10 pieces of artillery, British artillery, manned by the Royal Regiment of Artillery. He had 4 light 6-pounders, he had 4 light 3-pounders, and he had 2 Royal howitzers. Yeah, he had 2 of those. Then behind him is the German Reserve Corps with another 2 6-pounders. We brought no artillery into the field during the course of the action. The British had all of these cannons that they're using against us to varying degrees of effectiveness. But yeah, they sure did. 12 artillery pieces total, 10 with Fraser, and then another 2 behind him with Freeman and the Reserve Corps.
Where are Morgan's riflemen?
I couldn't have asked for a better question, because we're going to walk up to that hill and then we're going to talk about that very thing. Thank very domino effect kind of stuff, whereas in fact the riflemen had gotten together earlier in that afternoon. Daniel Morgan finally got his men together, maybe by the use of a turkey call, although the first accounting of that comes up in a memoir published in 1816 by the sinister James Wilkinson. So if he said it, I take it as a lie. It probably didn't happen. But who knows? Maybe that's the one thing he didn't lie about. So the riflemen do finally coalesce. And Daniel Morgan is ordered to send them through the woods and anchor the American right flank in the woods right over there. Now the tree line is pretty good to the way it was in this area particularly, is pretty good to the way it was on the 19th of September 1777. So you can imagine the riflemen in the woods. We would have been able to see some of them because, again, these are canopy trees with a low amount of underbrush. And what they do, this is brilliant, they put themselves behind a couple of ravines. Now, I wish we could go into the woods right now and you could check out the ravines. They're down there. If you wanted to do it, you could. Nothing's stopping you. We don't have a bespoke trail that goes to it, but you could carve your own path, right? And then you could see it. Go into the woods, you're going through the woods, and then you come to this ravine that is something like 10 feet deep. And then there's another one behind it. And the riflemen, of course, are behind these 2 successive ravines. They also set up an abattis, a makeshift abattis. They took branches that they could find in the woods, not hard to find, right? And then they put this abattis in their front so that any enemy that was to attack them, they'd have to break through the bramble of brush just to get at the riflemen. The riflemen were very clever at setting up their defenses. And so they then start shooting at the soldiers in the field over there on Burgoyne's leftmost flank. You'll remember them, the 20th Regiment of Foot. They were kind of hanging out during most of the action that I was describing going on. They were kept as like a flanking reserve. Well, now they're getting shot at. And their commander, Lieutenant Colonel John Lind, ordered his troops forward to get at those guys shooting at them. Riflemen. So they rush forward, they go through the tree line, they get into the woods, and they come to the ravine. Well, you can imagine the mess. These guys, if they could get into the ravine, then they'd have to climb up the other side. You know, in the meanwhile, they're being shot at by riflemen, and they got muskets, the British, you know, they can shoot back, you know, with some effectiveness, but not nearly the effectiveness that the riflemen had against them. The 20th Regiment of Foot, simply by fighting the riflemen alone, were just thrashed. They were absolutely thrashed. They lost about a quarter of their officers and men in that battle. 110 men killed or wounded, fighting the riflemen alone. The riflemen, during the entire course of the battle, lost just over a dozen. Killed or wounded or captured. Yeah. So the 20th Regiment is really getting bested by the riflemen. And so, of course, they retreat out of the woods. They reform. But they're being shot at again, so they're going to do it again. So it's like this kind of they're trying to do something, but whatever they're doing isn't effective. And they have no cannons. The British down there, they have no cannons. There's a pair of cannons up here. There's a pair of cannons over there. That's it. No other cannons here at Freeman's farm. Until from the river, up comes Burgoyne's second in command, William Phillips, who's bringing up 2 medium 12-pound cannons. If you've been in the visitor center, you know those large cannons that we have standing up on end near the theater room? Those are 2 of the cannons that Phillips brought up. And they put them on the very, very north side of Freeman's farm to keep them as far away from harm as possible. And the Royal Artillerymen opened those things up with cannonballs, which had some effectiveness against the riflemen. The riflemen did have to pull back through the woods, but the cannonballs firing into woods, you know, it's more of a scare tactic than anything else. It's going to keep the riflemen at bay a little bit, but still, the riflemen are in the woods. And then they start shooting at the backs of the soldiers of the 62nd Regiment and the Royal Artillerymen. I was asked about one of the lieutenants with the Royal Artillery here, Lieutenant Haddon, and he in his journal writes about how during the action against the New Hampshire Continentals and the Connecticut militia that the riflemen were shooting at their backs. The British, you know, the British were being hit in the backs by the riflemen. So they were just getting at it from the front, from the back. It was a nightmare for these guys. So this battle was raging for hours that afternoon, from about 3 o'clock to as you're approaching 7 o'clock. And the British were absolutely being drained. They were being bested by the Americans because Benedict Arnold, what does he do? He sends in more troops, more reinforcements. The British aren't getting many for themselves, but Benedict Arnold is sending reinforcements to bolster the American line and allow for more aggressive attacks on the open field. Now, the British, they were falling back, like I said, not getting too many reinforcements, aside from that pair of 12-pounders, which was nice, but, you know, you need infantry, right? And so they're falling back. Now comes, it's the end of the day, now comes the question of mass reinforcements. And we have accounts from both sides asking for massive reinforcements. Benedict Arnold had sent in every single regiment from his division of the army to bolster this attack, which was originally conceived as being supportive for the riflemen who were scattered earlier in the day. Remember, Horatio Gates didn't want an all-out battle, a general action, as it's called. He did not want that. No, he just said, Arnold, you can support the riflemen if they come into trouble, you know? So Arnold ends up supporting them with half the army, you know, his entire division. He had sent every soldier he could. Benedict Arnold wants more. He knows that he can turn the tide against the British, who are just barely hanging by a thread here. And so Arnold has to ask at this point, for the first time in the day, he has to ask for reinforcements from Gates, because he'd be requesting reinforcements from Gates's division of the army, since he, Arnold, had already sent out every soldier he could from his own division. So we know about what happened because a guy who was standing right there wrote a letter about it not too long after. He says that Benedict Arnold came up to Horatio Gates later in the course of the battle, requesting reinforcements. Horatio Gates said, no more shall go. And that Benedict Arnold applied for a second time, upon which General Gates drew his sword and said that he was the commander of the army and would be obeyed as such, which put a period to the request. That's it. No reinforcements more for this army here. Benedict Arnold did everything he could, but Horatio Gates was very concerned that we had committed way too many troops to this battlefront, and if we had taken, if we had sapped some troops from Bemis Heights, let's say, and the Germans suddenly manifested at the bottom of those heights, that we would have been caught with our pants down, so to speak. So that's what Horatio Gates was very concerned about. As for Burgoyne's request for reinforcements, well, he doesn't have to ask, does he? He's the commander, he tells. So he sends a messenger who speaks French down to the German column, which was headed up by Major General Friedrich Riedesel. And this, because they have to speak French, that's the international language at the time. It sounds weird. You have British officers, German officers, they're speaking French to each other. That's how it worked, most typically. So he goes to Riedesel and he says, General Burgoyne wants you to stop your advance, to set up defenses for everything you can to protect all of our provisions in the hospital and everything else down by the river, and come up with as many troops as possible to Freeman's Farm to bolster our forces there. Well, Riedesel, very smart, he had already kind of anticipated this, and so he had already staged troops ready to go if this kind of thing happened. So they didn't take too much time to prepare. He sent his own regiment, the Regiment von Riedesel, and also a part of another regiment, the Regiment von Reitz. And so these reinforcements, about 700 officers and men, plus 2 more of those light 6-pounders manned by Hessian soldiers through the woods, and they're going to pop out onto the eastern side of Freeman's Farm. Immediately, Riedesel orders the artillery to move onto that high ground where the Redcoats are today to bolster the British line, but the German infantry, he orders them to immediately file off into the woods and outflank the Americans, the riflemen, that are in the woods. And so the Germans do this very thing. Now the riflemen, they're outnumbered by a lot of fresh troops coming in at them from the flank. The riflemen are like, okay, we're just going to withdraw. It's pretty much dark anyway. It's getting dark. So we're going to withdraw and get out of harm's way because we cannot stand against these Germans who are coming at us laterally from the flank as opposed to in the front across those ravines. They're coming at us very smartly, so the riflemen retreated. And indeed, the entire American line is going to withdraw. As the riflemen withdraw, so does the rest of the American army. The British hold the field at the end of the day. By about 7:30, they know that they won the Battle of Freeman's Farm. But it's kind of like the Battle of Bunker Hill, right? The British won the Battle of Bunker Hill, but at what cost? It's what we call a Pyrrhic victory. Sure, you win the field of battle, which means you win the battle, but at what cost, right? So the British forces suffered 550 killed or wounded in this engagement. The majority of the casualties happened right here on the southern side of Freeman's Farm and within the woods as well, plus another 40 captured by our forces. We, the United States, lost about 300 killed or wounded, with another 25 captured by the British. So they captured some of ours, we captured some of theirs, but pound for pound, you see, if you're just looking at numbers, not lives, we did better insofar as we inflicted far more casualties on them than they on us. And they had the cannons. But we had the riflemen. Like I said, they were incredibly decisive in this battle. You got to wonder how this battle would have played out if we didn't have riflemen. Thankfully, we'll never know.
Was Morgan personally with the riflemen during this time?
During parts of the battle, yes. He was close enough to get his horse shot and killed from under him, for sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. As was his second in command, Richard Butler, Lieutenant Colonel, and Major Joseph Morris. They were also I'll say the thick of fighting, with their riflemen during the fight. Yep, for sure. Yep.
Did they use drummer boys at the time?
Oh yes, both sides would use drummers. And it did differ. Some units didn't have drummers, like the riflemen had no drummers. That's just riflemen. No flags, no drummers, no fifers. They got rid of all that stuff. They realized that was a little more showy to have that kind of thing when their business was to be riflemen, and those other things would just get in the way, But yes, both sides would have colors and drummers and fifers. And we know from casualty lists that some of the drummers and some of the fifers were casualties in the battle here. As speaking of casualties, because this is the 248th anniversary of the 20th of September, Saturday the 20th of September, in which you would see massive numbers of dead and dying men on the field. What I've done is I've researched now for nearly a decade. I've researched deeply into the Americans who lost their lives here at the battles of Saratoga. I call it in memoriam. Excuse me. Sorry. I call it in memoriam, in which I try to identify every single American who was killed or mortally wounded or injured, hurt, sick and died, murdered. Yes, I try to catalog all of them. I want their names. How old were they? Where did they hail from? And what was the circumstances of their lives? How did they join the Army? Everything I want to know about the nature of their casualty, et cetera, et cetera. So between the two battles of Saratoga and the skirmishing in between the two battles, American casualties, it's approaching 600. It's approaching 600 for again, both battles and all of those other skirmishes too. Sometimes I just have a name and I cannot find a thing about the person. Other times you find a lot of information. And I'm not just talking about generals or colonels. I'm talking about private soldiers. You wouldn't think maybe you can find so much on a private soldier. But thankfully, because of genealogy that's been done, it's kind of... Anybody here like genealogy? Some of you do. All right, cool. Yeah, you can get into those family stories. You can really find some unbelievable and sometimes very sad things. So I hope to print these out, but because my printer wasn't working, which of course it wasn't, not on the day I need it, right? What I've done is I've done some screenshots of some things that I've found on some of these soldiers. So I'm going to just talk about briefly 3 American soldiers who were casualties of this battle right here. And I picked them because of their very different sorts of circumstances. One man was Prince Douglas. He was from Hancock, Massachusetts. So he's on, the western border of Massachusetts with New York. Prince Douglas. He was an enslaved man. We know this from various records from his enslaver. And in the summer of 1777, his enslaver decided that he would have Prince Douglas join the Continental Army. Because, well, you own him legally, so you can do that kind of thing, right? So Prince Douglas is sent off, and he is then created as a private soldier in the Continental Army. The Continental Army and militia forces generally accepted enslaved people into their ranks. Certainly by 1777 they did. At the beginning of the war, not so much, but as the war went on, oh yeah, they did. And in 77, certainly they did. So here's Prince Douglas. He's never been a soldier in his life. He's now a private soldier out of the Continental Regiment out of Massachusetts, and he is going to be, with his regiment, committed to fight in this Battle of Freeman's Farm. He's killed. And so he is buried somewhere out here. Prince Douglas was his name. We don't know anything about his age or his family origins or anything like that, which is unfortunately not surprising. But we know his name, we know where he came from, Hancock, Massachusetts, and we know that he was killed here in the Battle of Freeman's Farm. Next, there was a man named Abner Robinson. I say man, but he was in fact 14 years old when he and his 2 older brothers enlisted into the Continental Line voluntarily as private soldiers from Massachusetts. There again, you may have seen that at Stop 2 we have these 3 reenactment groups, and all 3 are from Massachusetts. It's actually appropriate because this was a majority Massachusetts army here in the battles of Saratoga. The New York element was actually very small compared to the New England element. It was minuscule, in fact, compared to the New England element. Anyway, these 3 brothers, Abner Robinson and his 2 older brothers, they sign up voluntarily. They join the same company of the same regiment in the Massachusetts Continental Line. They serve together at, let's say, the relief of Fort Schuyler in August of 1777. They come back. They're now with the Northern Army at Bemis Heights, and now it's the first Battle of Saratoga, and they march out with their company. Guess what happens to 14-year-old Abner Robinson? He's killed here in this battle. Buried out there somewhere. His older brothers survive. At least one did through the war. The other lost his life at Valley Forge a couple months later. And he's buried down there in Pennsylvania. So you have an example, 3 brothers joining at the same time in the same unit. 2 of them died within months of each other. One because he was killed outright, and the other, probably because he got sick at Valley Forge and died. That's hard to get through, but the next one, likewise, this is the worst example I have. But I picked this man because his monument is right there. You can see it. In fact, if I may, why don't we go up to it? Yeah. We can check it out closer. For finding the outlines of that fortification here, the light infantry redoubt, they found bodies. Some of them were reinterred out on the visitor center lawn. You may have seen that there's a monument to them. Some of them, however, were just put back in their graves, and they're still there right now. I can't point to them, but they're here. And there are so many others out on the field. Oh, no, buried. So they were buried as they fell, or sometimes stripped and buried, depending on the context.
Well, who came
because,
around and buried all the people?
Sorry?
Who came around and buried everybody?
Oh, yeah, the British soldiers would do that. The British soldiers.
As the battle went on, or afterwards?
No, afterward, yeah. So they were starting it on the 20th of September.
I see.
This day.
The day after they started burying.
So this is a monument to Captain Zebulon Bidwell of the Connecticut Militia. He was one of the 8 captains in Colonel Thaddeus Cook's regiment of militia. You'll remember Thaddeus Cook's regiment of militia was that regiment that was coming up behind the 3rd New Hampshire Regiment to bolster the 1st New Hampshire Regiment, which was getting cut to bits. And so Captain Bidwell was part of that reinforcement. His Connecticut militia was placed on the right of the New Hampshire troops, which was the place of honor to be on the right. And Colonel Cook's regiment was hit so hard during the course of that afternoon that they actually had to wholesale retreat because their casualties were so high. I had mentioned that the 1st New Hampshire Regiment suffered the most casualties of any American unit. Cook's suffered the 2nd most of any American unit. They were beaten pretty severely. One of the men who was a casualty was Zebulon Bidwell. Just to show you that not only private soldiers are casualties, but officers too, which is no surprise, but my 2 other examples were of private soldiers, but here we have a captain. So what happened to him was that he had served in various campaigns before in the militia. He had always come home to his wife. He and his wife had 5 children. However, 3 of them died in infancy. So only 2 survived to adulthood. So you can imagine the sorrows that this family was already experiencing before the battles of Saratoga. Zebulon Bidwell was called up by the state of Connecticut in August. He came up with his company, fought in this battle, and during the course of the battle, he is going to be shot by one of those case shot balls out of a cannon, hitting him in the leg. He goes down, of course, and he's bleeding out, and his men think that they can save him. So what they do is they rush him back to camp, and they're holding on to that leg, trying to stop the bleeding as best they can. So he is brought back to camp. The surgeons tend to him immediately, and they cut off his leg. They amputate, but he ends up dying shortly thereafter. So he's mortally wounded here, not, probably more over there in all likelihood, but not too far away from where this monument is located. And what makes this tragedy all the worse is that his wife was pregnant. And he knew this when he was leaving home in August, because she was about to give birth sometime in mid-September. Well, guess when he lost his life? The 21st of September. And she gave birth to twins who were stillborn. Yeah. I can't imagine what she went through with all of that loss in her family. Her husband and a majority of her children. The losses, it's not just in battle, but that reverberate through a family, because you've lost a husband or you've lost a brother or a son, like Abner Robinson, for example. Multiple sons sometimes. These losses reverberate through families and through sometimes generations. It's kind of a sad, sorrowful tale to end our tour on. But I just wanted to mention 3 of those who lost their lives here at Freeman's Farm 248 years ago, plus a day. So, thank you for coming on the tour. A lot of you have asked questions, which is cool, but if